And sorry ahead of time for my family in the back room or in the background. We get this. Okay. So thank you all for coming. Actually, let me get one link before I start this real quick. So professional. All right. Okay. So first little task, not too hard. Just go to that link real quick and see if you've been part of a data breach. So pretty popular website, pretty reputable. They do a decent job at gathering reports on almost data that's been breached. So it's pretty nice just to know. Yeah, usually you'll find like 2 or 3 because we have accounts for everything. But yeah, put in the chat how many you found on your email, whether that be your primary email or your secondary. I don't know, because maybe it's just me, but I feel like shit. Hold on, Busher got 5.
Hey dude, Chad got hacked.
That's a
Canva
bad
got
Oh
hacked.
my god.
I don't know what.
Yeah, we should be having a 1, 2,
They after
3.
me, bro. They after me.
That just means Busher has an account for everything.
1, 2, 3. User Merced.
9? Oh my god.
What?
I'll be sending up anywhere.
You get my email. You get my email. Oh yeah, Chegg. I got that Chegg one too. I feel like everyone has a Chegg one.
And Roll20. Those are the ones that I. That's why you shouldn't reuse passwords.
Yes, sir. We gonna learn.
Somebody will get 9 of Paula's accounts.
All right. So we're gonna go over that. We're gonna go over the dangers of reusing passwords, right? Okay. So basically, it's Hiro actually got 0 because he never signs up for anything on that password. We know. So the dangers of reusing passwords, right? So it's a pretty obvious one is a domino effect. So basically, if one of your accounts are hacked, then everything is vulnerable, right? So we all recognize this, and yet we all continue to do these bad habits. So that's why we're having this workshop, because I mean, probably the easiest thing we could do is solidify our passwords and at least have something to manage things for us, right? So another thing that's kind of underlooked is your home network, or whether that be your work network. Because nowadays it's very, how should I say? It's not so much the security of the system itself within a work network, it's more so of the users sometimes, right? Because obviously technology has been evolving massively over the years, like large strides. And there's a lot of people in the workplace who have a hard time adjusting to that. And so part of what, as people involved in cybersecurity, we have to at least show them good practices and be like, okay, like, here's what you should do in this situation. And this is also something we can take to heart ourselves, because it's more so like, okay, like, cool, it's good to know that there's a better alternative, right? Other than what we think of like as obvious. So stuff like writing all your passwords. Well, let's think about it. It's tiresome to copy that. I mean, if let's say you do on the off chance make secure enough passwords, well, then now that requires a research to figure out what is considered a strong password, how that evolves, because obviously as time goes on, certain passwords become weaker, and a piece of paper is easily lost. So I know like a couple of family members of mine have tried this in the past, has not worked out. Every time I've just referred them to a password manager, it usually simplifies their life by 100%. So let's talk about jotting them down in a notepad or your desktop or your phone, right? So issue with this is now you have a data recovery issue if, let's say you drop your phone in soil or something, well, boom, there goes all your passwords, right? It's not only just your phone, now it's all the information within it, and there goes that. The other thing could be theft. Even if you do have a password on your phone, well, now it's not only they have your potentially $500 to $1,000 phone, it's now more so that you need to reset each individual password and go through that process as well. And it's overall just unsecure. I mean, you're storing it in a plain text file where, I mean, anyone who has access to, to whether that piece of paper or whether your desktop or your phone, let's say you leave your desktop for like 10 minutes just unattended and you didn't lock it, well, there goes potentially over, right? And the network that we were just talking about. So there's a different alternative where it's, okay, well, why don't I just keep it in my browser? Why don't I just autofill everything, So, I mean, I want to get input from you guys because that's more so of a personal preference. So what do you think is probably like the pros in doing that? We can go through pros and cons. So first we'll start off with like the benefits of doing that, right? Easy. Probably the easiest, yes. Probably your most convenient, right? I mean, a lot of browsers try to make this a seamless experience as possible, right? Any other pros we could think of? I want the browser to have all my data. Yeah. Yeah. If you want, that's up to you.
Yeah. You don't have to type your passwords in. So if somebody's keylogging you, they want to be able to figure out. You only type your password in once and that's it. And magically appears. So
that is a good one. Yeah, so we'll get a little more into depth on that later. So it's like if someone does end up having a keylogger installed, then it also can prevent that. Also, it can protect you from clipboard attacks, which also tend to happen as well. Okay, so we'll go through probably the cons of it. Anybody have any ideas? One password for the moment that. Yeah, that's basically. Yep, it's also that. So these are good cons. So Dylan brings up a good point. Yeah, it's one password for them all, most definitely.
Another thing you could talk about is you don't know where like Google Chrome or Firefox are storing your passwords. Are they storing it on just like a plain text file in like the Firefox folder, or like are they hashing it? You don't know how secure it is.
Exactly.
So somebody doesn't have to open your browser. They could just steal the passwords file from the files because it's got to be somewhere. That's how they know your passwords.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Just like Joe was saying.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's something else I was going to talk about. Yeah. So let's say on like, because you have to take into account there's a lot of different circumstances that could happen. So in a circumstance or a situation where you leave your desktop unattended, you leave your phone unattended. I mean, I don't know who leaves their phone unattended, but the point is, let's say you have your laptop, your computer unattended, or even if someone manages to get remote access to your computer, then I mean, basically there goes all your passwords, right? And again, this kind of just rolls down back over to what would be like almost having them like on a notepad. It's just in a more convenient way because it's an autofill feature. Yeah, these are good. Okay, so we're gonna briefly go over password managers. So first of all, I mean, what are they, right? So basically, you can imagine just a database, right? So these password managers are in essence databases that are encrypted with a master password. So usually you're the one, or you will be the one that only knows that password. And so this also rolls into like, how do they work? So this is dependent upon from password manager to password manager. What I've found through a bit of research is that some of them tend to use, or the ones that use like the business model, which is more of like online. So those are like the tons you see online. Those use different methods, different ways of doing it. So let's say for one, they'll grab your email, they'll grab your master password, and then they'll hash it about 100,000 times, I believe. And then they'll also, so after they put those together, after they hash it, they go through and then they're like, okay, let's go to our next step. And then now they have, what was it? Oh, it's your key, right? This goes along with our last workshop. If you didn't see it, it's Diffie-Hellman key exchange. It's pretty interesting. So it also grabs the key that you exchanged with the server ahead of time, attaches it to the previously hashed hash bits, and then it hashes it another 100,000 times. And then via that will give you access to the vault on their server, right? Now you might be thinking, okay, well, if they're doing all the encryption and decryption, like what? Well, I'm just sending it over, over the air, or what? And in essence, you're not. So again, what I found is that you're doing a lot of decryption and encryption on the application itself, so on your machine, and then it only sends that final result over, right? And it's even harder for people, or for a man-in-the-middle attack, because of that Diffie-Hellman key exchange, right? It's a lot more difficult. So for those who don't know the Diffie-Hellman key exchange, Busher explained it best last time. So you have two. It's best explained with paint, right?
Yeah, like so you have think about it. If you have like the whole idea is you have asymmetric encryption. You have a public key and a private key. You never share your private key, but everybody has access to this public key. And so you can think of the public key as like a certain, like let's say it's a can of yellow paint, and your private key is a can of some other paint that nobody else knows but you. Let's, for our example, let's say it's red. And so what we do is you mix the yellow paint with your paint, the red paint, and then you send that over, and that's the key you can send to people. And the whole idea is that you don't know how you made those colors. Well, I guess with the paint you could, but the idea is that you wouldn't be able. Like you I don't know what yellow and red makes. Green? I'm not sure. Let's say you get like this green paint. You don't know like this shade of green. You don't know how much yellow is in there. You don't know how much red's in there. You just know that it came from me, and that's how it works. So the whole idea with the password manager is that you want to avoid the single point of failure. You have all these once your password gets to their servers, it's secure. Like David said, they hash it like 100 times. Like nobody's going to break that. It's you need like NASA computers to get even close. And I don't think those are even possible. But the single point of failure is if somebody can guess your password going over through the air, or guess your master password, then it's over. They have all the access. But I think later down the slides, you'll see how they can take measures against that, because they can also ask for like fingerprints, stuff you have, etc.
All right. So then that also brings us to, well, how is it any better than any of the alternatives from before, right? Aren't we just using one password? Aren't we just using, like Bush was saying, like, are we still having like a single point of failure? Well, again, this kind of ties into play what we're going to talk about later. So that's authentication, whether that be two-factor authentication, whether it be multi-factor, just depends. And then, so ultimately, which one is the best in terms of security, right? I think that's a big question we want to ask, within our space. And you have a ton of YouTubers will be like, oh, we're being sponsored by 1Pass, we're being sponsored by LastPass, Keeper, Dashlane. You have a ton of them, right? That all have, a couple of them have different encryption methods, or they use similar. Some directly use HMAC cipher. Others, like we were talking about, like with 1Password's case, they use constant hashing. I mean, it really just depends on which one or which service you're gonna go with. And so moving on, now we have the difference between online and offline password managers, right? So our online, we have a lot of pros and cons here. But basically this is like short 3 bullets. All right, let's get down to it, right? So online, obviously we have ease of use. We have a sync across multiple devices features, right? They also use the same method as we were talking about before to even connect to that vault. So online has that. Offline doesn't have that, right? So from a lot of research I've read before, they weren't really user friendly at all, and so a lot of people weren't really using them at all. It was really hard to convince people to use them. I mean, especially because they used to be so new. But now, I mean, especially with with the one I use personally, there's a lot of advancements, and they've taken a lot of steps towards a better design. So it actually looks a lot more user-friendly, and we'll actually get into it. I'll go ahead and show my password manager after. But yeah, so online also has that price, right? Some of them are like yearly based, some of them are lifetime based, some of them, it really just depends, right? But it also ties down to, okay, like, do you want that ease of use? Do you want those sync features across multiple devices? I mean, that's really dependent upon person to person. Offline, a lot of them tend to be open source. You might find one that's not open source and that may cost money, but I personally haven't seen them, but I like to be more open source oriented as is. Yeah. Another thing is online are server based, right? So the database is obviously not stored locally. It's stored somewhere in another server, right? Hosted by, let's say, like LastPass or, Keeper, stuff like that. And so you don't have full control over it, but you still really do, because obviously, like, it's extremely difficult to be able to crack a master password. And building on top of that, all the encryption and decryption is done on your computer. It's not done on any server. It's not done through midway through. So in essence, they only hold like this huge long all these bits from the hash. So they only have like that specific piece, and that is going to connect to the vault, right? But if any bit is off, then obviously that's going to mess up everything, right? And it's kind of like, well, if you're going to charge me money, why is your business model going to be around cracking all my accounts and all my passwords and stuff, right? Right. I think each of the companies are trying to be the best they can be in terms of security, or else the business model would have failed already at this point, right? And again, offline is, only the creator of the database has access to the database. So yeah, if you're intrigued as to like, well, what is the difference in online and offline? There you go. So now what I think is a little more interesting is multi-factor authentication. So, okay, we'll go over what authentication is. Well, okay, how do we define authentication? So probably since the beginning, authentication has previously just been, username and password, right? That's the way we all see it. So you type in your username. Let's say you go to Twitter, you type in your username, you type in a password, you log in, right? Very simple. So now, if that's authentication, well, what is multi-factor? So multi-factor is basically using 2 or 3 or 4, it can be a certain X amount of different factors that you have to authenticate that you are the person that is accessing that account or is accessing this information, right? And then, so let's talk about real quick, what are the pros and cons that we see with multi-factor authentication? Everybody can use the example. You could start thinking of how we have UC Merced Connect, right? Or my UC Merced, whatever, right? So what can we see are like pros and cons of that? Slow.
Annoying.
Yeah, you mean like logging in? Like, oh, you have to take that extra step and be like, oh, and then grab your phone.
Yeah, like when I switched phones, I like couldn't log into my account at all.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
So,
I agree with Jairo. My phone's always dead, so if I have to log in, I have to like wait like 5 minutes for my phone to charge up, and then
The opposite of a single point of failure. Yeah. So I can agree that there's a certain limit where you're kind of just like, well, like nobody's gonna really want to access this information, I think I see it more so of getting yourself ready for industry, because in industry, whether that be in an office, whether you're accessing it just all matters of where you're gonna be working out, the workplace. It's very much getting used to using that multi-factor, because it's a very good practice.
especially for school.
Yeah, especially for school, especially for like, okay, who has access to your bill, who has access to your finances, stuff like that. Anything financial related is obviously extremely sensitive.
and you're putting your password in public places. Like, well, back on campus, you would like, if you wanted to print something, you would go to those Macs in the library. If you want to go work in like during the lab sessions, you would go to the computer labs, and you're just putting your password in, and you're just hoping that nobody's like got a keylogger on those computers. But let's say somebody did have them, and since you're using your password in a public place, like in the school computer, somebody takes your password, they won't be able to get so very far because they'll also have to take your phone. So like they'll have to like mug you or something, which is less likely.
Exactly. So obviously, I think the biggest thing we all point out is like, okay, like it's a nuisance, right? It's slow, or it's annoying to even have to pull out your phone, right? So part of what's still being worked on right now, and it's still debated on whether it's a good practice or not, is risk-based authentication, right? So these are dependent upon two things: dependent upon one, what is being accessed, and two, who is requesting access, right? So basically, it goes through a different layer or different amount of layers of factors to authenticate, depending on, again, the information that is being accessed or who is requesting access. So I'm gonna go over real quick of an example of like an information of what is being accessed, right? So let's say you're trying to access some financial reports for a company, and a lot of these may have sensitive information. It may have information on employees. Well, this data, obviously, you don't want to just give out to anyone who just has a password willy-nilly. You want to have that extra layer of security, at least for a peace of mind, right? So that may go on to more factors, which we'll talk about after. And it also depends on who is requesting access. Because let's say, for an example, well, I know personally, at a company I used to work at, they basically see like a log of everyone who's logging into kind of like their file transfer service. And so obviously with this log, they can see everyone. And if they see you at a multiple, or if you see you at a certain location logging in, well, then that's fine, right? Now, if they see someone from a location, or from a site that doesn't have any access to internet per se, or even like a site where it doesn't exist, right? Well, now that becomes a main concern, where it's like, okay, like who's requesting access? Like then that becomes a point of, okay, well, now we need to really make sure that they are who they say they are, and we're not just giving our access like nothing. So we're also going to talk about these different factors, right? So what are these different factors? Typically, they're based around three things, right? So something you know, something you have, something you are. So even a multi-factor could be considered a CAPTCHA message. So that's when you have like, okay, like click on these if these are bridges, click on these whenever these are lights, and you'll have to go through like 5 of them, and you're like, wait, is this actually a fire hydrant, or is that just the pixels wrong? Like, I mean, that's an example of multi-factor. It's just not authenticating if it's you. It's authenticating if you were a human or some type of bot. So good examples of these, well, something is basically implemented across all accounts. So that's usually like a password, or that could be a PIN, right? I know in Signal they have they use a PIN, and they use spatial remembrance to make sure you remember your PIN, because obviously they don't want you reusing your PIN as the same one as your phone, or else it would defeat the whole purpose, right? So they use spatial remembrance, which basically bases it upon from the time you register your PIN, it's 4 hours after they ask for your PIN again, 8 hours, 12 hours, 24, et cetera, up to 2 weeks. And then after that, every 2 weeks, it makes sure you remember your PIN, right? So that it's a very nice feature to have, especially on an app like Signal where they want to express privacy. And then we'll talk about something you have, right? So something you have is like a phone, right? So this is where Duo comes into play, where it's, okay, well, most of the time we have our phones on us, or in the case of Bush or Ohio, their phones are always dead. So it's definitely like, okay, like you had to think about it. They had it when they were developing this, they had to think about, okay, like, what do we always have on us that's different from what we're logging onto, right? Or usually different, or has a different, usually a different access point, right? Because you could be logging on to, let's say, my UCM on, it could be a desktop, could be your phone, could be a bunch of different things, right? But if you're logging in to do on your web browser on your phone, what's kind of like, well, how's that different factor? Like, I'm using the same thing I have, right? Well, again, that's why it's a password and then something you have, because it's those two different layers. And then something you are. So then this is where I have like Touch ID coming into play, right? Because that's where it could be either a biometric scan, it could be either a Face ID, it could be a lot of different things that it is. So even when I know like just recently, or not recently, but on the App Store, they've had that for a while now, where it's either you put in Touch ID or you put in Face ID to be able to purchase an app, right? Or make purchases. And so these factors are what we consider as multi-factor, right? And an example I was bringing up is UC Merced Connect, or previously my UCM, which is something you know and something you have, right? So any questions on these factors? No? Okay. So I wanted to get in touch on what you think is the future of multi-factor authentication, right? Because when I was doing research on it, I wasn't happy with what I found. A lot of it was a bunch of different blog posts by people who would kind of just be like, oh, well, it probably could be X, Y, Z. So the way we see it is like, is obviously you want to have these three different factors, but it's, okay, now we have to think of outside of the box of like, okay, like let's change of something we know, right? Or let's change something we have and modify it into something that could be outside of what we've typically had. And I know there's companies right now working on passwordless technology, which is interesting and also very scary, right? Because it gives you that extra convenience. But now we don't know if it's going to work similar to a password manager, if it's just going to be app on our phone, right? If it's mainly just for like an autofill feature, like our web browsers, right? So I'd be interested to see, or if you guys have any ideas on what could be the future of multi-factor. Authenticator and Face ID. I've used Authenticator, Face ID with it. I don't have an iPhone, but when I did, probably. Oh, you mean like it's probably just like a code that they put in the Authenticator? I would assume.
That's pretty cool.
That's interesting.
Yeah. When I was doing my internship, that's exactly how I had to log in to every account.
Okay, Jed.
Like I didn't give me a password. No,
Jed just wants
like
to flex on us real quick.
No. Like I'm trying to, like when I signed up, right? They made me take a photo my first day, and then they gave me like this code. So I got the Microsoft Authenticator thingy, and then every single time I like had to log into my work email or something, it would ping my phone, and I had to like take a picture of my face, and they would log me in. I never had the password or anything, and like, I had like a work email, and I can't even access it no more because they have to like ping my face, but that service is dead. So it's just like, it's kind of weird. It was so weird.
Sheesh.
I know some people are experimenting with putting like RFID chips in their body, like on between the palm and stuff, and so you can like have it on you at all times. So this like squeezes the gap between what you are and what you have. So instead of having like an RFID thing around your neck, it's like a chip in your hand. So when you just like touch a door, it'll like scan it.
Yeah, I believe that at some point it's going to be like DNA-based test. I know it's just about, it's starting to come more down to the fact of how much are we willing to give.
But aren't like a lot of people like
It's
super...
like people on parole. They always check in to make sure.
Yeah.
I know a lot of people are like super like, oh, I don't want companies to have my data. So
That's another
really?
thing. The whole idea of password manager is you have to trust. So when you go into like 1Pass or Keeper, you're trusting that they're not doing anything nefarious with your passwords. So that's why, if I started a password manager company and just put it out there, nobody would probably use it because there's not a level of trust. But 1Pass and those companies, they have like credibility.
Yeah, they've already built their credibility for sure. Places you've been, so have to keep location sharing on, verify where you have and haven't been somewhere within a time window. I think that goes along with what slide was that? Yeah, so that I think that's part of like a little bit of like what's going on with risk-based authentication. So it's like who is requesting access. It's also going to grab the location of where they are. So that's when I was bringing in the example of like the two different sites. And yeah, that's exactly what I was going to bring up too. So it's like it also brings up the question of like obviously there's tons of people that I know how to spoof, your location or prove yourself in another location. And so that could fall from a different aspect, But that's an interesting point.
A cool method. They like tell you to remove. It'll be like a spy movie stuff. You get a ping on your phone if you need to unlock your account. You have to like go from one address to another to verify that's you. That's way too much work.
Yeah. All right. So real quick, I'll stop share real quick, and then I'll pull up my password manager real quick. Here, I'll make a new database. We can see. Actually, let me lock this one up real quick. Okay, so I personally used Keepassx. So it's different from Keepass, different from Keepassx. So Keepass was initially created for Macs, I believe. Stayed on an open source, and then it moved on to Keepassx. Keepassx was expanded to all platforms or most platforms in terms like Linux, in terms of like Windows and Mac. And then I think from the slow progression of it came out Keepassx, which actually has pretty decent progress in it. So I can open my database, and there's nothing like you guys still won't be able to see anything. Doesn't matter what. Just for the sake of this, I'm just going to open a new database. So I'll have it just called passwords. So it's actually pretty interesting that you can adjust the decryption time of your database. I have it somewhere like around 4 seconds. They have different formats which you can use. So it all depends. It's a little convenience factor that they have here. So let's say we wanted it at max at 5 seconds. So this is where they do decryption, encryption right here. So we want to enter our password, right? It can even make one for you, right? So this is the nice thing about password managers is that they generate passwords for you, right? I think that's what we all advertise for. So obviously you wouldn't put in your master password as something like passwords, right? And it's even going to tell me that it's probably not a good password. So let's say something like
Really do.
all right, we can keep doing it like this. But I mean, like that's the point, is that you want to have a master password. So I'm just gonna have it just for our case. Like something like this. Maybe something you want to remember, and then you just do it in again. Obviously, you wouldn't want to use a password like this, nor am I condoning using this type of password because, yeah. So if you want additional protection, so that was another thing I wanted to talk about real quick. So they have physical keys that you can actually purchase. So I think the first or some of the initial ones that I saw were like YubiKeys, So those are basically like hardware you can actually attach onto a computer whenever you want to access this database. So Keepassx has compatibility with that. And that's something I really like because I'm not using it right now, but obviously I might in the future, right? So let's just say for now we're done. And now we could choose wherever we want to save it. So let's just say I want to save it on desktop, right? So now it's going to do more. And now every time, say I'm making it for Twitter, I'm using my username, and then I use, or let's say, because there was a process where I had to go through and change each of my passwords. And so I put it, like obviously I was at the reset password phase over on Twitter side. And so you have this, or is it just like generated password? And so I think I usually keep my length around like 30 or something, just because like some limit the character length. And then I usually use extended ASCII as well. So this extends it to everything. Just know that if you put your password manager in another database and you need to access and you don't have extended ASCII on your keyboard, that becomes more of a pain in the butt. But so we wanted to apply that password, and you could actually have an autofill feature with Keepassx. So if you wanted it on whenever you access this certain URL, you do that. And then, so I don't have this right now, just because when I was initially setting it up, I didn't want to be bothered. But you can have an expiration date for each of these passwords. So this is in essence good practice, which is you should change your passwords pretty often, but not over the often where it's annoying. So if I were to do, I'd probably put it somewhere between like 3 to 6 months, depending on how sensitive the information is. So stuff like, like my Twitter, or, like social media sites, and probably keep it decently locked down, probably like 4 or 5 months, not too much. Again, it goes like password or your browser integration, stuff like that. If I want to press OK, well, there we go. So that's in essence what an offline password manager looks like. And then, well, you might be asking like, well, like how do you use this on your phone? So let's let me see real quick. Pull up Play Store, because I know I used to use it, or I know apps for both. So on the Play Store, it would be something. Let me pull it up. Oh, sorry, that's what it was. So I use an open source app on Android side, basically Keepassx to Android. So it's pretty nice. I've never had an issue with it. It's a little bit of a learning curve, and just to like bring it onto your phone. And then same thing with the one on the App Store. I think that one's different though, and I don't think it's open source, unfortunately. Actually, I don't remember off the top of my head. Yeah, the one on iOS is Strongbox. So, yeah, Strongbox is really, really nice to use. So it just works it works the same way as if you're using it, on your computer. You just type in your master password, and boom, there you go. You have access to your database. And again, like that way, you don't have to pay for anything. You don't have to pay for any features like LastPass or OnePass has, or Dashlane, stuff like that. These are things we should enforce like upon ourselves, just because it's very easy to do. If you like, obviously, if you don't want to use something offline, that's fine. Typically these companies tend to have a pretty reputable source, but obviously do your information and do your research before doing it. Because I don't personally use one, and nor would I recommend one. Not because of bad security or anything like that. Just because I don't personally know. So if I don't personally know, I'm not going to speak on something like that. But yeah, so any questions on anything we talked about? No?
You guys want to choose, if you guys ever do the password manager, you guys need to choose a password. There's this website. It's off the IBAN pwned, and it checks passwords. So you could put in a password, and it tells you if that password's been leaked. The way it works, I think, is you type in the password, it hashes it on the client side, so on your computer, then it sends it over and it compares it with hashed passwords. So you're never sending a password like in clear text. But even then, I would avoid putting your own password. Maybe put in like a new password you're thinking about. Like if you want to use the software David just showed, and you got to choose a master password, you generate one or create one and then put it in there. And if it shows up that it's been leaked, you probably should come up with something else. So that's a good tool to use too.
Yeah, you could definitely look at websites, see what like the most common passwords are. So usually it's something I would keep relatively personal to you. That's like stuff that only you would know, and obviously not like not very obvious things. So whether that be your hometown, whether that be your school, stuff like that, because those can probably be found out through public info, or public's researching on you. But it's I think more so of like what I'm trying to get through or more of like what you should get out of this workshop is like to more so use a password manager, not necessarily offline or online. I'm not suggesting one or the other. I just have experience with offline because I don't want to pay. But if you want to use online, be my guest. I know they have like free versions of them, and you're more than welcome to use one. It's more so of like encouraging others to use it, encouraging your family members to use it, stuff like that. And so that basically concludes the workshop for today. But before you go, we will be doing or be more active in our CTF team this semester. So I'm already looking towards competitions. I don't think of it being like anything scary like that, or like we need to get first place. As of right now, we're just working to learn, right? This is all a constant learning process. And so we're trying to build a community where we all just want to learn. And it might take years before, we start to really highly compete. It may take next year, it may take a couple years from now. But point is that we just start, right? I think it's more so the first step of just starting. And then possible workshop ideas, you're more than welcome to send us a message on Discord. If you have a certain field that you have experience in, whether that be like cryptography, steganography, anything, you can let us know. We can definitely talk to you one-on-one about it, because there's a lot of stuff I don't know. There's a lot of stuff Bush doesn't know. We're open to learning about a lot of things, right? So yeah, again, that concludes it for today. But definitely check our CTF, ready for that. We'll be posting more of a timeline, or a better timeline, for our cybersecurity workshops in the future. Thank you guys all for coming. Unless you have any questions, I'll be sticking around. All right, now that we can be informal again.
It's still recording.
Oh, is it?